Hello everyone, welcome to Middle Fantasy, and today, it's raining ash! Yeah, there's a fire going on near my house, so I feel like I'm in Mistborn. You know what, this set me in the right mood to do something. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about Mistborn. Now, we're going to be doing something a little different when it comes to this, because we're going to be talking about the movie adaptation of Mistborn that Brandon Sanderson's been kind of working on. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, some of the changes that he's been doing, some of the changes I think would be cool to do, as well as how it would work visually and special effects. So why don't we talk about it? But one sec, let me just check if it's still raining outside, Ash. Oh yeah, it's still raining. It's still an apocalypse. Oh well, let's find out here, everybody, if I burn to death. So a little backstory when it comes to Mistborn and the movie adaptation, Brandon Sanderson has been trying for a very long time to get something made. Mistborn itself, just don't even talk about the other Cosmere books up here, but Mistborn itself has been optioned 6 times. Pretty much it's hey, we'd like to make this movie, we'll just have it in a giant stack of things we'll do, and eventually we'll get to it. And nothing's really came out of that. I think the closest was actually Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians. DreamWorks wanted to make an animated movie, and that was almost a decade ago. I remember Brandon talking about it at the launch party for The Way of Kings. Yeah, we're getting to Rhythm of War, so it's been a long time. Now, recently, Brandon Sanderson has been doing something a little different. He's you know what? I'm going to take matters in my own hands. I'm going to write a treatment for Mistborn. It actually made the rounds in fantasy news, because Brandon Sanderson's writing a treatment or a screenplay. Now, does this mean that the Mistborn movie is going to be made? Well, it's more of a TBD type of situation. We don't know what's going to be happening, but quintessentially, he's kind of writing the screenplay. It was on his website for a while. It was at 10%, but then he took it off because he was working on other projects. Though he's kind of been talking about mostly this is more of a script treatment rather than a screenplay. And there's actually a little bit of a difference for people that don't know. A treatment is quintessentially an outline for any book. It's just trying to figure out the story beats, what's going to be working in it, and, quintessentially, what is the main focus and what is the plot? Much like when you do, an outline for a story, here are the plot beats, here are the characters, and this is kind of the groundworks before you even, make the screenplay. And he's kind of doing a mixture of both, but primarily he was focusing it as a treatment rather than a screenplay. Though, I'd like to see what he would do for a screenplay. And it's actually an interesting thing that we're going to be talking about when it comes to this, because there's some changes, things that he wanted to rectify a little bit. And for me, I find that to be so fascinating, because when it comes to authors adapting their work for different media, it can be really good, it can be really bad. But why don't we talk about this? Because when it comes down to it, it's an interesting prospect. And when we talk about Brandon Sanderson's changes, why don't we explore it really quickly before I get into changes that I would do possibly. And if any of these get ever done, please contact me, and I would like to get 1 cent royalty, please, a bag of microwave popcorn, and maybe a movie ticket, not to the premiere of the Mistborn movie, but a movie ticket in my hometown if movie theaters ever come back. Yeah, it's still ashing outside. Yeah, it looks like movie theaters might not come back anytime soon, everybody. Yeah. So when it comes to the changes that Brandon Sanderson is going to be doing, they're actually interesting because he's looking at this adaptation as almost to rectify some things and kind of fix some past critiques in many ways, as you'll see within the changes. But the most interesting out of all of them is actually how he wants to pretty much propose how the thing is actually filmed. So he wants the Final Empire to basically be its own thing, its own standalone movie. And then he wants the Well of Ascension to pretty much be a mini-series or TV show. And then he wants the Hero of Ages to be a movie again. It's an interestingly weird, multimedia project that he wants to do. We'll see how that works, because I'm getting flashbacks of, The Dark Tower and how the movie is technically a sequel to The Dark Tower. But they also at the same time planned it as, oh, we're also going to have a TV show with everyone's going to be returning, but it's going to be the actual books adapted. And, well, we know how that went. Yeah. But who knows, maybe this might be the right time to do something like this. Now, the second change, and this is the one that people have been talking about the most, and that is, when it comes to Brandon Sanderson, one thing he's going to be changing is he's going to be adding more females to the crew. Specifically, he's going to be gender swapping Doxson and Ham into women, So there's going to be more women on the crew. So it isn't just Vin on the crew by herself as the only woman. It's going to be a little more well-rounded. Though the biggest change that Brandon Sanderson's going to be doing is actually changing one of the characters. So instead of Shan just being Ellen's fiance, he's changing it so that he is his sister. So you're going to have a different type of dynamic. It's almost like the Azula Zuko type of relationship, I feel like, because she's going to be the one that's like vying for power and being power hungry. And pretty much what Brandon Sanderson's talked about is maybe Ellen's dad won't be in the first movie, really. Like, it's going to be Shan, who's pretty much going to be, trying to steal the power, pretty much like kill Ellen and get like the airship. So pretty much she becomes the most powerful person in Luthadel below the Lord Ruler. So that'll be interesting, especially when it comes to Vin and her having their confrontations. And will it change the dynamics? I feel like when it comes to story beats, I don't know how that's going to work, because it's like, instead of you killed my ex-fiancé, you've killed my sister when it comes to that. But we'll see how that goes. I feel like that's going to be the most jarring change. I don't know what's going to be doing with that, but that'll be an interesting one to see. And maybe when it comes down to it, maybe it might be a much better change. Maybe it might streamline some things. But at the end of the day, those are kind of Brandon Sanderson's changes. Now, when it comes to my personal changes, this is going to be interesting for me because I actually reread all of The Final Empire this week, and I was like thinking about it differently in my brain. I was just like, brain, how can I not enjoy this book and make it a difficult thing as possible by thinking about what would work in like a film adaptation compared to it being the book? And I came up with a couple of things. And when it comes to this, I think one of the things I'd probably get away with really quickly is the epigraphs, kind of like in the beginning of the book, like the Lord Ruler, like they're great. Like keeping the first one would be fine as like the introduction to the story, or even as like narration. But it's one of those things that's like, they're important, yes, but when we're trying to streamline a movie, there's something that might even boggle down the narrative a little bit. You can easily tell the Hero of Ages story through like almost like a puppet show, or maybe even someone filling in certain things. But having like that mystery come up would be important. Even again, we could do something almost like flashbacks a little bit, which I'll get into. But I feel like if we're going to do something like that, that would be something we'd probably get away with. Though the biggest thing that I'd probably change is I'd focus the entire story on two viewpoint characters. I'd keep it to Kelsier and Vin. The reason why is you want to pretty much ground it in this way. Though if we're going to focus on one main character, it would be Vin as the A plot, and then you would have Kelsier as the B plot. And you'd have like maybe even like a C plot a little bit, but keep it to an A and B plot. Because here's the thing, is that we should have everything through Vin's eyes, because primarily when it comes down to it, that's kind of the hardest thing, is because we don't know much about Allomancy. She's like our gateway through the whole place, and then trying to figure out what it is to be a Mistborn. And we have Kelsier, who would do all the cool stuff because he's trained and he has those wonderful moments. Like the opening of The Final Empire with Kelsier on the plantation is one of the most highlights of that book, is because it's like very cinematic, and you're like, okay, this is what's going to be happening, and these are the stakes. Now, when we get to Vin and all that stuff, I feel like having her as the main focus would be the most important thing. Yes, we have like the two viewpoints, but sticking to her for the majority of it and switching between her and Kelsier in that way of like, you get Kelsier's little plan again. It's like the setup of like a heist movie, which when we look at Mistborn, if we look at the archetypes, they're all here. You have like the gentleman thief, the old man who's like wise and stuff, who's doing one more score. You have Vin, who's more like the new up and coming, like the new person. You have like Marsh, who is primarily like the brains of the operation. You have Ham, who's the muscle. You have Spook, who's more like the person trying to prove themselves. You have more other people. You even have like Dachshund, who is pretty much like the curmudgeon a little bit of the group. And you put these people together and you have like those archetypes. So one of the other things I'd probably change a little bit when it comes to it is giving every character a standout moment. Even if you're not going to focus on those individual people all that much, you give each person the moment to shine within like the crew, to show them like what their speciality is. Like you'd show Breeze like manipulating someone, even maybe even playing like poker and like calling someone's bluff or forcing someone's hand. You'd have like Marsh being the smart person, as well as like you have like those little moments where like Spook is trying to prove himself with like his abilities. Like you could do stuff like that, but have them interact with like Vin and Kelsier in that way, where you see them setting up the whole heist and setting up the whole rebellion in that way and trying to overthrow the Lord Ruler. That would be an interesting twist. Now, the biggest change that I have that I think would be the most controversial to everything is actually adding flashbacks to both Kelsier and Vin. Now, when it comes to Kelsier, I'd like it almost like he's like plagued in many ways when it comes to like his traumas of like the pits of Hassan and stuff. Like you'd set it up where like Kelsier is like plagued with like these dreams or like almost like visions of some sort of like his first time trying to rob the Lord Ruler and being sent to the pits of Hassan and his wife dying. And you have this periodically throughout the story. At the same time, you'd have something with Vin where she has the stuff with Reen instead of being a voice in her head, which narratively it might not come across as well, especially in this if you're trying to not give away like the twist when it comes to Reen a little bit. But having it almost as like past flashbacks of them interacting and him giving her advice in that way would work a lot more effectively and preserve that twist a little bit prior to the other books. And I feel like that would be an important thing to have there. But also it'd add Reen to be more of a character that you'd like, wow, this guy's like a a-hole a little bit. Like, why would he leave her? And then, you know, when you find that twist of, well, technically he didn't, you'd actually have a little more sympathy in that way, and kind of like their life growing up a little bit would be interesting, especially when it comes to like having like that split narrative between Kelsier and Vin would work really, really well in that way. Now, the one thing that I don't want them to change whatsoever is like the weird body horror when it comes to Mistborn a little bit here, which is pretty much like you have the Steel Inquisitors, you have like the Kolos, you have the Khandra, and then you have like the Lord Ruler himself in many ways, and it's like this almost weird type of like body horror situation. Though if I'm being like a cynic a little bit, I have a feeling that this story has to be marketed the right way, because I can easily seeing it almost being like that YA romance story between Ellen and Vin, and I don't think that's really the purpose of it. It's almost like if they're gonna go for that type of emotional beat, which they shouldn't, I mean, if they're gonna lean into it, they're probably going to for like that market stuff. But really at the core of the story, it's a heist story, it's a story about class and struggle, and also it's a story about finding hope through the hopeless. And I find that to be one of those, when you're looking at that themes, you need to really think about those a little bit. And I mean, you can have the romance stuff. The romance stuff is almost the wallpaper of the story a little bit between Vin and Ellen. And that's something like when it comes to, and I was thinking about this, is like they're either gonna like really like lean into like that teen romance stuff, even though I think Ellen's like in his early 20s and Vin's like late teens. So you're gonna have like that like Disney Channel stuff where it's like, you know, I'm the rich kid and Vin's the girl that likes playing with knives and no one understands her because she likes wearing pants. Now, the other big thing that I was thinking about, which is going to be one of the hardest things to do actually, is Allomancy. Now, I mean, we can do a lot of cool things with computers and practical effects, but we have to think about it in this way of like, when we're showing Allomancy, how do we show it properly? And that's going to be the hardest hurdle, because Brandon Sanderson's also kind of talked about it a little bit here when it comes to Allomancy and how certain things need to have visual clues, whereas other things maybe can be implied. Like a good example of this is when he's talking about like emotional allomancy. Like, what do you do? Like, do their eyes blink or something? Like a different color, like blue for like soothing, red for rioting, or do you do other things? Like when it comes to like what do you even do for like tin when like you're at like a tin eye? Like, does everything get like super sharp? Wow, this does not feel good. I should really turn the saturation down. I'm about to get sick. Now, don't do that, everybody. But, like, when it comes down to that, I always thought of, like, Tin Eyes, if we're going to do, like, in a visual sense, maybe it's almost like the Robert Downey Jr. thing where, like, your senses get super heightened and, like, you have, like, the Sherlock Holmes moment where, like, they, like, slow down time so, like, you can, like, bob and weave and dodge things and punch someone in the face. That would be really cool. Now, when it comes to, like, pushing and pulling with, like, steel, this is the one that I was thinking about the most, because this could probably be like either like the Matrix or like really, really wacky. And what I mean by that is that when we think about it, like you're just jumping all over the place. Like if it was me personally, I'd love it if it was like wire work and it wasn't really CGI all that much, because it would give that feeling of like flying through the air, and like not having to like animate like a mist cloak would be like a pain in the butt. Yeah, that's just my producer brain going off like, oh god, that's gonna be a lot. Just get some wires. Get some fishing line and you're good. But when we think about pushing and pulling and steel, the one thing that I always think about when it comes to this is like how when you're burning those metals, like you're able to see like little lines of like the metal, like, okay, this is the new metal source. You can see like where other things is. And that's actually a very interesting opportunity when it comes to pretty much in a visual level. What I mean by that is like maybe not make it lines, because if they're thin lines, it's going to be a little harder for like the audience to be like, what is that? That's why I was thinking, when it comes down to this, why not make it that you see the whole outline of the metal, so that way in a visual sense, like the city becomes like mundane, but the second like you're pushing and pulling and you see the metal sources, the entire city like lights up like these blue like almost outlines like Tron like, and you see the city in a different light. You're thinking of it through the metal perspective rather than it being just architecture. Like a good example, this would be like a fight scene where there's like pillars and stuff, and maybe like Vin's fighting someone, and there's the sense of like they sense all the metals around them, and the whole city almost like lights up during like a mist, and it's almost like electricity in some weird way. This isn't like Era 2 where there's actually like electricity, but it's like the whole city comes to life because you're thinking of the metal and how it has like this blue outline. Would be a really cool thing when it comes to just it being like a visual thing, especially during the mist time where like you can't see 2 feet in front of your face. But that would be so cool to see almost like the faint outline of the city, and you really emphasize metal in that way. So when you have like improvised weapons and stuff, you notice it, or you just don't notice it, and it's just every time they pull something, like nails and stuff pop out. Maybe that might be a much more effective thing, but having it almost like the Tron thing of like seeing like blue lines in that way would be really cool. Like another thing when it comes to Allomancy is like when you show it like physicality wise, like when like you're burning like pewter or like the metal that makes you stronger, like does the person's muscles grow, or do you have like veins, like they have to be like animated to be like blue or something? Would you show something like that? Because you have to think of it like it's still kind of silly, like someone like pulls out a vial and drinks it, and you have to worry about there's going to be like that safety meeting. Well, how do we make the metal shavings? What if like a kid sees this and drinks it? Well, we can't get sued that way. That's stuff that you have to think about, especially when it comes to movies. Like, think of the children, but think of like people that are going to start doing that. Like when Lord of the Rings came out, the first thing I did was I got a ring, got a necklace, and like, oh look, I'm Frodo. But now when you're like, I'm Vin, I'm like, Kelsey, I'm going to down this vial. Oh, my insides hurt so much, but I love Big Mistborn. Like, yeah, you see stuff like that. But when it comes to pewter, that's like an interesting one too. I feel like there shouldn't be like a visual element to it. Like it should just be, you just get super strong and you can like lift like tanks, or you can like lift like heavy vault doors and stuff. That would be a really cool thing to see as well. Though the one thing that I think that would also be a fun thing to see when it comes to Allomancy is the missed opportunity of actually seeing a heist where pretty much everything goes according to plan. Like the simple, like, okay, let's see like a heist job where all these people in the crew have their specific jobs and it goes off without a hitch. That would be an interesting thing to see, like how it actually works. And then we get to like Mistborn, where you have like the traditional heist story where pretty much the plan they think about and meticulously plan goes astray somehow, and their improvised plan is the one that actually works, and it's actually better than the plan they thought of because they're thinking on their feet. I'd like to see something like that as well when it comes to like Allomancy, like how people are going to get out of this. Like there's the ending of the Mistborn, the Final Empire, I always think about in my head because it is so cinematic of just Vin being pretty much on this tower with the Lord Ruler and using the mists in this way. Like you can see like those visual elements, but pretty much having Allomancy as itself, like that's going to be the tricky one to do. But if you can get those visual cues, or you don't have those visual cues, and how you can articulate that to the external forces, because in the books, like it's described to you, but when you're seeing another person doing it, like what do you see in like the cues? Like, oh no, this person's going to shoot a coin right into my head. Like there's like things like that. And that's the stuff that kind of fascinates me when it comes to Allomancy, especially when it comes to things that are visual. How do you really show that stuff? And for me, that's kind of the big thing that I wanted to talk about here is how do you show Allomancy like in a visual sense rather than just saying, oh, Vin can do emotional Allomancy. Well, how would you see it on the screen? That's the big question, isn't it? Lastly, I kind of want to talk about more of the special effects a little bit here, because once again, I kind of talked about Allomancy in this way, but I want to talk a little bit about like all the other stuff. Like a lot of this stuff is going to be digital. We're going to get like digital matte paintings. We're going to get green screens. We're going to get everything in between. Though I feel like there should be some practical stuff a little bit here. I think in my mind, the Still Inquisitors should be all practical makeup because they'd be so scary. You just get some big tall people. I'm sure like the Mountain from Game of Thrones isn't quite working right now. I guess he's like making vodka and like hanging out with like his girlfriend. But you see stuff like that. Like that'd be fun to see, like just big burly creepy guys. I mean, then you have things like the Khandra and then the Colossus, and you get like all these other creatures later on. I like to see what they do with that type of stuff. And again, Allomancy will be an interesting one to see. A lot of it will probably be CGI. I can only imagine what the fog machine budget for that movie is going to be. It's going to be probably half the budget of a $200 million movie. That's a lot of juice for that fog machine, and fog machines aren't cheap. But, there's things like that. Though I think the most important thing that we're forgetting to talk about is the setting. I love Luthadel. Luthadel is such an interesting setting, though if we're looking at it visually, I'd love it if like the palace is like pretty much in the center on the tippity top, and like the slums are like the worst places imaginable. Like they're almost like shanty towns. They should be condemned by the board of hell in many ways. And then you get to like the palaces and the mansions that are on the outskirts of Luthadel, and they're like these beautiful, huge, amazing things. And it's always like, when it comes to me, what I was thinking about when it comes to this is like, how do you articulate this? Like, because obviously it's going to be a class struggle. Like, I'd almost love like a scene where Vin and the gang are like eating soup out of like crude metal bowls, and they're complaining about not having like salt or anything. And then you smash cut to Vin pretty much in her disguise, eating out of like fine china at like a ball. Would be interesting to see, like those different struggles, especially like the poor versus the rich, vice versa, and especially when it comes to the Ska Rebellion, how that's going to work. And especially when it comes to like, Luthadel is such a character in this way. I mean, it rains ash from the sky and there's mist everywhere, but then you have like the pits of Hassan. You have like these places off to the side that are just like, what is going on here? And that's like the interesting thing is like, when you're emphasizing all that stuff, it's, it's a class struggle, but also at the same time, I'd almost love the set decoration to almost be very like medieval, almost like turn to the century industrial revolution, where there's like crude metal everywhere. Things are just falling apart a little bit. Everything's dirty, but yet when you get to like the outskirts where the mansions are, or even where the palace is, like everything's like swiped clean, like everything's like whitewashed. Like it'd be the joke is like, oh, the servants would wear like white to show how like, not a speck of dust or ash gets on me, and that type of stuff. Like that type of stuff. But then you get to like the ska stuff, and they're just like, all covered in soot, and it's like depressing. And like you really see the difference in why this rebellion needs to happen in that way. And that's always something that I've always think about when it comes to this stuff. Though again, I like it to be more rustic, and that would be so much fun to see in this, like having that type of stuff. And then when you get to the Lord Ruler and stuff, I just love to see how like crazy and just plain he looks, and go from there. And that's the stuff that I always think about when I think about like the location. And then when you get to like the Well of Ascension, I just think the city is just like a billion miles long, and you get that, and just, oh man, like I just think about it all the time. And that's the stuff that I love. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to me ramble for a little bit. It was a lot of fun to talk more about like the movie adaptation, maybe what's going to be happening, what things that I'd like to see. And that's kind of the fun thing when it comes to this is like, we don't know when it's coming, but it's one of those where when it comes, it's going to be so exciting. I'll be the first person in line. I'll be wearing my mist cloak, and I'll just be like, I can't wait to watch this movie. I'll just bust out the fog machine and like go to town. And that's going to be the fun things to see about this, because I really want to see this story brought to life on the big screen. I can see it in my head. It's almost like the Liza Locke-Lamora in that way of like, I can see it. It's almost like the Mirror of Eris said. It's like, I can see my desire. I see it, but I can't get it. What about you, Harry? What do you see? I'm shaking hands with Dumbledore. You liar, I hate you. But yeah, there's like things like that. So what do you guys think about like a Mistborn movie? Do you like the changes? Are there some changes you've always thought about? What are some of your favorite scenes you just cannot wait to be adapted onto the big screen? Those are the things that I'm excited to see. So leave that in the comments down below. I'd really love to read that and interact with you. You are all been so amazing. I have so many wonderful people I've been talking to in the comments. People have been liking the videos, and it just warms my heart. And if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, please subscribe down below. We're all a part of like the Zack gang a little bit here. We're all just hanging out, just talking about fantasy. I can get like my mulled wine and my crispy chicken, and we're all just gonna have a good time. Especially when it comes to Mistborn and Brandon Sanderson, it's just, we all just want to be cool and have a fun time, and those are the fun things that I enjoy about this. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And like always, everyone, may your food and drink ever be tasteful, and may your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. Bye, everyone. See ya!